Hey, it's Matt Robeson, and here's our latest episode of Political Rehab, our mashup of PTI and The Daily Show, where a Republican named Matt and me, a Democrat also named Matt, have a great time hitting the top stories, blasting Trump early and often, doing our weekly That's Bullshit segment, and always ending with a dose of hope. Wherever you're watching, please hit subscribe and support this kind of work. And I really want to especially ask for you to subscribe to Worth Knowing with Matt Robeson on YouTube. Come back every week, 12:30 for this show. And just so you know, I'm live with you right now, but the rest of this episode was recorded earlier. Here we go.
That somehow makes me richer? I'm pretty sure that's not the way it works.
This is the week that DC came to stand for duck and cover.
This is a real sort of John Wayne, Rambo kind of moment.
An embarrassing fracture point within MAGA.
It's not a government that's accountable to the people. It's a government that does whatever the hell it wants to do.
The best way to do that is to introduce someone with anger management issues and a proclivity for face punching. Welcome to Political Rehab. I'm Matt Robeson, Democrat and former congressional staffer.
And I'm Matt Wiley, Republican campaign strategist.
Today, a global shockwave. DC now stands for duck and cover. America unfriended. A Homeland mess gets more face punching, and Democrats spiraling. Plus, you can't do that at the FCC, and one of the greatest flip-flops in history. But let's start, as always, with our Trump dump.
Time for the Trump dump.
That's right. Time for the Trump dump, because it doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican, or independent. There's something Donald Trump did this week that pissed you off.
Donald Trump is about to hit you with a giant tax, and it's not on your paycheck. It's hidden in every little aspect of your life. And when you start to actually do the math, you'd be surprised how fast it all adds up. Because of Trump's war with Iran, oil prices have gone up about $30 a barrel so far to almost $100. The most immediate place we all start to feel this is when we pay for gas when we're driving. But of course, it's not that simple, because every $10 increase in the cost of a barrel of oil means about $100 billion annual hit to U.S. consumers. And you multiply all of that out, and you get to about $1,000 in added cost for every single adult in America. What's so insidious about this is that if an American president said, hey, I want to hike Americans' taxes by $1,000 next year, we'd at least understand what we're dealing with. But in this case, we don't, because the costs are buried inside the prices we pay for all kinds of other things. Higher cost for trucking means higher food prices. Higher cost for manufacturing means all the stuff you're grabbing off the shelves at Walmart just costs more. Plastic products use petrochemicals directly. And of course, don't get us started on all of the Tomahawk missiles and other military ordnance that we're going through. The Center for Strategic and International Studies found that we'd already spent over $16 billion out of the Pentagon, and that was a week ago. And the bill for all of that military spending eventually comes due in the form of your actual taxes. We know from our painful experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan that long-term wars turn into tons of long-term hidden costs that we all pay for. Over $2 trillion in the case of Iraq, for example. None of this is to say that this is going to be a long war or that oil prices will stay high for a long time. But the point is, it's still a hidden tax, a Trump oil tax that doesn't show up on a bill, but you pay for it anyway, and it's a lot more than you realize. And the worst part is that you're getting stuck with a bill, but you're not really sure what you're buying. Look, sometimes big costs are worth it. World War II cost the U.S. about $330 billion in 1945 dollars. That's the equivalent of about $4 trillion today. But Americans understood why we were doing it. I think most of us agreed then and still agree now that it was worth it. That's the job of the president, to explain that. We know that there are going to be horrible costs in human lives and suffering that some of us will bear, and in dollars that all of us will bear. So we have to know why we're doing it and what we're getting in return. Right now, when it comes to Trump's war with Iran, we don't. All we do know is that we're getting a hidden Trump tax that we're all paying. Trump says he'll end the war when he feels it in his bones. In the meantime, the rest of us will feel it in our wallets.
I actually want to build on something you just talked there, because I am watching people on my side of the aisle right now try to justify Americans paying higher gas prices. On Fox News, they're trying to reframe this as something Americans should accept or even feel good about. It's a sacrifice, like something we did in World War II. But the stupidest thing I've heard, the absolute stupidest thing I've heard, has come from Donald Trump himself. Donald Trump argued that the higher gas prices can actually benefit the United States because the U.S. is the world's largest oil producer. His basic point, when oil prices go up, U.S. oil companies make more money. And because of that, the country makes a lot of money. So let me get this straight. If I pay more money, that somehow makes me richer? I'm pretty sure that's not the way it works. Because in the real world, higher gas prices don't make Americans richer. They make Americans poorer. You feel it every time you fill up your tank. You feel it every time groceries cost more. Everything gets more expensive because energy isn't just one line item. It's in everything: transportation, food, manufacturing. When energy costs go up, everything goes up. That's not political, that's reality. So the idea that we should be celebrating higher gas prices, that's not economic policy, it's spend. And honestly, it's tone deaf, and it's going to cost Republicans the midterm.
And if you think that's the end of this oil price shock story, we have more for you. Let's get to this week's rundown. Because yes, indeed, we may be watching the early stages of a global economic shock. This is about what happens if those high oil prices that we just spoke about in the Trump dump stick around long enough to hit everything from groceries to interest rates and start a cascading effect that could send shockwaves throughout the American and global economy. We may be about to find out in the next few weeks. How much risk are we facing right now in your mind, Matt?
Oh, I think it's a huge risk. Iran cannot win a conventional war, a head-to-head fight against the United States. So instead, it's hitting energy. It's threatening the Straits of Hormuz. It's disrupting global markets. They don't have to fight a military war. They're fighting an economic one. And they're betting on the fact that the long-term pain is going to be something Americans may not be able to want to continue with. It's just come out this week. John Bolton was in the room advising Trump on Iran back his first term. And those briefings include retaliation risk. And this was all part of that conversation. So this is something that we knew about. This is something this administration knew about. And they seem to want to jump into this anyway. And I think the long-term economic problems could be that has a cascading effect that can hurt us for a very long time.
The uncertainty and the risk is really hard to get a handle on. There are all kinds of long-term spooling unintended consequences. This is something I covered in depth with celebrated economist Mark Zandi on the Worth Knowing live stream earlier this week. I hope people will check that out on the Worth Knowing YouTube channel. And he said that we're really teetering. We're really on the threshold of the unknown here, where you can start to have these butterfly flapping its wings type effects. Go back to the 1979 Iran oil crisis that kicked off double-digit inflation and stagflation in the U.S. by undermining Japan's industrial base. It forced their entire economy to shift from a certain type of manufacturing to consumer electronics. That led to their rapid rise and their dominance in a whole new sector that they essentially kicked off because of that oil shock. By contrast, your patron saint, Ronald Reagan, his entire rise, the Reagan Revolution, that all came from that same crisis. The point is, there are all kinds of embedded effects that you and I have already spoken about that happen throughout the economy. We don't know what all of them are going to be. Airline stocks has historically dropped 5 to 15% during oil spikes. Freight and logistics margins shrink due to fuel costs. We don't know what all those ripple effects are going to be in the economy, and we don't know what they're all going to be politically. And that's why the amount of risk and uncertainty was too great for Trump to undertake this course of action, especially without laying out the potential upsides and objectives to the American people.
What's interesting, too, is this week we had a top counterintelligence official, Joe Kent, resign and saying flat out there was no imminent threat. This is a direct shot at the justification Trump has made for the war. At the same time, Tulsi Gabbard is up on the Hill defending the administration, and when pressed on the imminent threat, basically said that it was the president's call, not the intelligence community. And then you got J.D. Vance, who's privately skeptical of all this, dodging questions and distancing himself from the leaks on his anti-war stance. Nobody really wants to take accountability. It really does feel like a bad case of duck and cover.
Exactly. This is the week that DC came to stand for duck and cover. You saw 3 different versions of this. You did see Joe Kent, who issued one of the strangest, most Orwellian fever dream letters of resignation in history, where he simultaneously tried to avoid the wrath of Trump for betraying him and basically calling him out for launching an unjustifiable war, but also praised him for his former stance, which wasn't really his former stance against war, and made all kinds of conspiratorial claims. It was just this like failed butt covering exercise. Gabbard, with one of the most epic flip-flops in history. We're going to cover that in this week's That's Bullshit, so I don't want to step on that. And then, of course, you have JD Vance, who's continuing to do the 5 Ds of dodgeball.
No, 5 Ds of dodgeball. Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge.
And he's trying to not say that he thinks that this is asinine, insane, and awful. This is becoming an embarrassing fracture point within MAGA circles, and no one is covering themselves in glory.
But it's a typical DC sort of mentality. Let's just bend ourselves in knots to try to say everything all at once. Nobody wants to be on the front of this thing because it is going to blow up on them. And so you watch the unique DC maneuver of just getting out of the way, trying not to catch the shrapnel, blame the other guy, but still show your support. Americans are looking at this stuff and just saying, I'm tired of looking at this shit show.
Speaking of people who are tired of looking at the American shit show, count all of our former friends among them. For decades, the United States was the anchor of the global system. Now, even our allies, our longtime friends, our frenemies, our situationships, our BFFs, our bays, they're all turning on us. You're seeing it in democracy rankings from well-respected institutions. We're saying that America's standing in terms of freedom and democracy is sinking like a stone. You see it in how our European allies are positioning themselves. You see it in how the Prime Minister of Japan, who is visiting the White House right now, is trying to squirm his way against Donald Trump's wishes for more Japanese involvement in the war with Iran. Matt, this is a substantial blow to the world order that was supposedly the vision of the shining star in your sky, Ronald Reagan. You must be like spinning in your conservative, well, you're not in your grave yet, but damn it. I mean, someone's likely to send you to your grave. It's this, right?
Exactly. This is case in point of why you build coalitions, why you have friends, why you have allies. On one hand, this is a real sort of John Wayne Rambo kind of moment. Go at it alone. Don't ask permission. Rely on strength. Damn the consequences. Well, that's a great for a movie, but it's a dangerous strategy when it comes into the real world. Every one of these things have consequences. We build our allies so we can protect against our enemies. And right now, what we really are starting to see are that those allies are just kind of saying, nah, I've had enough. I've had enough of this bullshit. It's like with friends like this, they're all looking around saying, who needs enemies?
I don't put a lot of store in these democracy institutions that are downgrading us. The VDEM Institute, Freedom House, which is a wonderful think tank, but this is essentially European institutions casting shade at us from Sweden and the UK. And it's like, we get it. We know. Okay. Like, you don't need to pile on. I do put some stock, though, in our closest fellow travelers around the world, and they are stiff arming us. And that makes us more vulnerable. It makes our world more dangerous. And yes, we are unfriended.
Now we have another fight brewing. We got a Homeland Security partially shut down. TSA agents are quitting. White House has offered targeted oversight concessions like body cameras, ID requirements, more transparency to try to end this partial government shutdown. But at the same time, we got Mark Wayne Mullen is up for the new DHS secretary, and he's getting hammered. Republican Rand Paul called him unfit, raising questions about his temperament and readiness. I guess my question to you, Matt, is can a former cage fighter with anger issues turn around a federal agency that is spiraling into chaos?
Gee, counsel, I feel like that's a leading question. I definitely think that Americans agree that we need to lower the temperature on everything happening with Homeland Security, immigration, ICE, And the best way to do that is to introduce someone with anger management issues and a proclivity for face punching. This is a guy who, in a Senate hearing, offered a fist fight to a witness, like, hey, bro, you want to go? That seems healthy. This comes against a backdrop of a shortfall of officers at TSA of anywhere between 3,000 and 6,000, particularly acute at major hubs as the DHS funding standoff continues. Wait times at airports are beginning to exceed 2 hours at major airports against a target for TSA of about 30 minutes, which, by the way, is pretty freaking high. That's not awesome. Their attrition rates are historically 15 to 20% annually. So we are going to soon set off a spiral that we can't control, and that's going to take another bite out of our lifestyle and the American economy. This is not necessarily a prescription for progress. That said, lest we risk being too dour, Senator, I guess soon to be Secretary Mullen, has indicated some openness to some of Democrats' demands for reforms in the way ICE does business. He may actually be a credible change agent. He has drawn praise from some Democratic senators. So maybe there is a sliver of hope here that he will be the perfect person to break the impasse.
The thing that really doesn't get enough conversation here is it is going to be Republicans that get blamed for this. We're going to try our damnedest to pin this on the Democrats, but the reality is everybody knows Trump's in charge. And if there is one good news about Mullen going into Homeland Security, it gets him out of the Senate. So maybe we actually get a real reasonable United States senator who is willing to get things done.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know this was a comedy show. Well, speaking of unintentional comedy, we set up this last topic in our rundown perfectly because I, the Democrat, am going to ally and oop to you, the Republican, to dunk on Democrats. Are you ready for this? This is going to be awesome. This week, we had primaries in Illinois that laid some breadcrumbs for where the Democratic Party is at and where it may be going. We saw more and more Democratic candidates disavowing AIPAC, a historic source of heavyweight political spending in primaries across elections. We saw ongoing struggles for mainline Democrats against progressives, in which seemingly progressives were taking it in the teeth and mainline Democrats were ascendant. And we see positioning to try to win the support of Black voters, the key voting bloc in the Democratic Party coalition, heading into 2028. Matt, here you go. Feel free to dunk on Democrats. What was your takeaway from all of the action on the Democratic side over the past week?
I love this piece. This is my favorite segment by far right now. Anytime the Democrats are fighting each other and they're having to spend the kind of money they're trying to do just to try to get progressive candidates out is a thing. These civil wars are the things that we are going to point to at the time. When the progressives and the radicals and the socialists come out with those things, are their outlandish answers, we use that over and over and over again. And good news for you out of this, if I'm going to give you one good out of here, is Democrat turnout was very high. There is a lot of enthusiasm with Democrats right now. So that is a good sign for you going into the midterms. But the reality is you still don't know who you are as a party. You can't identify. Are you the mainstream? Are you more of the Mondami? Fortunately, in Washington, you've been smart as a party by kind of keeping your mouth a little bit like you're letting Trump and MAGA hang themselves. And that's a smart political move. When you get into the more radical, extreme views, those are the ones that can really kind of hurt you in the long term.
I don't fuss that much about these internecine warfare moments in primaries. Both parties have them. I agree with you that it's not great for the party brand when our most left voices are most ascendant. I don't think that's our best play, but that's not what happened here. In fact, it does seem like more establishment Democrats got the better of it. And I think the growing consensus within the Democratic Party that it's time to push back on AIPAC is probably healthy. And that seems to be getting resolved. So all in all, I'd say it was probably a week that created more answers than questions for Democrats. On that note, we want to tie up our rundown section and go into a little bit of a deeper dive.
So this week, Politico published a piece titled Brendan Carr's Equal Time Curveball Crashes the Midterms. And earlier, the FCC had threatened broadcast license for networks not giving favorable coverage of the Iran war. So I wanted to know how we got here. So I went to Matt GPT.
Matt GPT, I have a question. Can the FCC pull a broadcast license for unfavorable war coverage?
In March 2026, President Trump posted on Truth Social complaining about coverage of the Iran war, called it fake news, said the media actually wants us to lose the war. Within hours, FCC Chairman Brendan Carr posted this response. Broadcasters that are running hoaxes and news distortions, also known as fake news, have a chance now to correct course before their license renewals come up. The law is clear. Broadcasters must operate in the public interest, and they will lose their license if they do not. Now, you may be thinking, can they actually do that? Is it legal? Does the Constitution have something to say about this? It's worth asking, especially since Carr himself said in 2021, a newsroom's decision about what stories to cover and how to frame them should be beyond the reach of any government official. But first, let's get into some history. Let's go back to the foundation of our country, the basis of all this, the First Amendment. 5 freedoms, 1 sentence, religion, speech, press, assembly, petition. Why those 5? Because every single one of them was something the British Crown had taken from the colonists. Under British rule, you could not operate a printing press without a government license. The Crown issued it. The Crown could revoke it. Print something the king didn't like, license gone, business gone. The founders had lived it, so they wrote the First Amendment to make sure it could never happen here. It only took 7 years for someone to try anyway. In 1798, Congress passed the Alien and Sedition Act, which made it a crime to publish false, scandalous, or malicious writings against the government or the President of the United States. It sparked a heated debate among the very people who wrote the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson argued that in a republic, the people are sovereign, not the government. The people must be able to criticize their government, especially on matters of war, especially when the pressure to demand loyalty over truth is at its highest. James Madison went further. The press must be completely free from government coercion. No exceptions for wartime, no exceptions for national security, no exceptions. And then there's Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton actually supported the Sedition Act. His argument was that the First Amendment prohibited government from censoring speech before it was published. But he believed the government could punish speech after the fact if it was false and malicious. Publish the truth, fully protected. Publish lies about the government during a national security crisis, different story. In Hamilton's framework, truth is an absolute defense. Lies are not. History, the courts, and 2 centuries of First Amendment law have sided with Jefferson and Madison, not Hamilton. But here's the thing about Hamilton that matters for today. Even Hamilton, the founder most sympathetic to federal power, the one who thought you could punish false speech, never argued that government could compel favorable coverage. Punishing lies is one thing, demanding praise is something else entirely. The First Amendment held, but the battlefield kept changing. By the 1920s, radio was everywhere. Stations popping up all over the country. Without any rules, broadcasters are literally overpowering each other on the dial. Pure chaos. So in 1934, Congress created the Federal Communications Commission. The idea was simple. Government manages the airwaves, not the content. And it worked until 1949 when the FCC created the Fairness Doctrine. Now, broadcasters must present balanced coverage of controversial topics. It started with radio and moved on to television. In practice, it meant this. If you want your broadcast license renewed, make sure your coverage doesn't make anyone in Washington uncomfortable. And it wasn't just theory. The Kennedy administration used it. The Johnson administration used it. The Nixon administration used it. All of them used it to pressure broadcasts covering their opponents. Then in 1987, Ronald Reagan's FCC killed the Fairness Doctrine. The reason was simple. Government had no business telling a broadcaster what to say. The First Amendment is not a balancing requirement. It is a prohibition on government interference. And what happened the moment government got out of the newsroom? Rush Limbaugh. 1988, 3 hours a day, 30 million listeners, the most influential voice in conservative media for 3 decades, built entirely on the foundation Reagan created. And Rush spent years warning his audience about the one threat that could destroy everything Reagan built: government using licensing power to pressure broadcast content. He said if the Fairness Doctrine ever came back in any form, it would be the end of free speech in American broadcasting. He was right. He just didn't see where the threat would come from. Brendan Carr wrote the media chapter of Project 2025. The first 7 words of that chapter: the FCC should promote freedom of speech. Since becoming FCC chairman, he has launched formal investigations of nearly every major broadcast network in America: ABC, NBC, CBS, NPR, every major network except for one, Fox News. When Jimmy Kimmel made comments critical of Trump, Carr suggested local stations risked their licenses for airing the show. 2 of the largest broadcast groups in America pulled Kimmel from their programming. CBS lawyers advised Colbert not to air an interview with the Democrat Senate candidate over fears of an FCC equal time violation. But what makes this movement feel different to a lot of Americans is that it's not just one thing. It's the systematic use of executive power to control not just what the press covers, but what Americans can say, see, and do.
That was an amazing backgrounder on this and really fills in a lot of gaps for how we got to where we are and what the law is supposed to be. And one of the things I really appreciated that I want to call out is your citation of Rush Limbaugh. I think it's an important thing for conservatives, for Republicans, and they're not always the same thing these days, to hear from you, a Republican operative. You've run more Republican campaigns. You've done more work for the Republican Party than most people could in their dreams. What the actual conservative principle is supposed to be, for me as a Democrat, I want to acknowledge the fact that hearing Rush Limbaugh's name is like taking a cheese grater to my earballs. And I feel like most Democrats are probably on the same page with me about that. But that's sort of the point, that the First Amendment is supposed to protect offensive speech. The First Amendment is supposed to protect Larry Flint. It's supposed to protect the Westboro Baptist Church. It's supposed to protect neo-Nazis. It's supposed to protect speech that is not otherwise defamatory and false. What's the message that you want your fellow Republicans, who still consider themselves to be traditional Republicans, not necessarily MAGA yahoos?
It has been fundamental to Republicans for such a long time that government should get out of the way, that it should be smaller. I set this up with Reagan first because he was the one that got rid of the Fairness Doctrine, and without the Fairness Doctrine, you don't get Rush Limbaugh. And I use Rush a lot of times because so many conservatives and so many people that are now in the MAGA movement or who may support what's happening did spend those 3 hours a day listening to him. Now we've morphed that. And so my message to conservatives is that we're going about this the wrong way. As conservatives, we've always felt like every time conservatism has been tried, it's worked. But now we seem to want to stack the deck because we didn't like what happened with social media. We didn't like the algorithms were pushing not our message. That's all bullshit. The issue and the message I'd make to every single Republican that continues to listen to me is that our strength is our values. When we now starting to use the federal government as a tool to limit speech or as a tool to limit the press, we're going down a dangerous path because, again, we may think about this as, oh, this is great because we're going to get our message out, but we will not be in power forever.
I think there's a page you could take here out of another luminary for Republicans, Charlie Kirk. Not someone who I necessarily admired, definitely did not agree with, but there's something admirable about going to a college campus and putting up a big banner in front of you that says, "Prove me wrong."
Right.
That's what the First Amendment is supposed to be about, is trying to prove via argument or opponents wrong, and maybe not just trying to prove them wrong, but trying to convince them, which is sometimes a different exercise. That's what we're about. It's about trying to make a case. For example, you just put out there that wherever it's been tried, conservatism works. I don't know that's necessarily the case. I might draw a counterexample to Sam Brownback, the governor of Kansas, who in 2013 decided to eviscerate all taxes. And lo and behold, it completely crashed the balance sheet of the state. And it turned out that was not a very conservative move to make, nor a very wise one. And it promptly had to be undone. The point is, we're supposed to be having a conversation about this.
Exactly.
At worst, an argument about it.
Right.
And taking this brittle, fragile, scared, oh no, I'm at such a delicate doily, please don't say unflattering things about me, is a sign of weakness. And I'd like to suggest that it leads down another road. There's a historic parallel that I think we can draw here to the Pentagon Papers. That was a top secret 7,000-page Department of Defense study done through the Rand Corporation, which is a think tank, back in the 60s, which detailed U.S. political and military involvement in Vietnam. And that study was leaked by Daniel Ellsberg to the New York Times in 1971, and it revealed that 4 presidential administrations had systematically lied to Congress and the public about our level of involvement in Vietnam. Now, this was subject eventually to a Supreme Court ruling in New York Times Company versus United States that found that the government could not exercise prior restraint, could not prevent publication simply to prevent embarrassment of public officials or to justify policies. They upheld freedom of the press. But the important tie-in here is that the Nixon White House was so fragile, so scared, such delicate doilies, so afraid of embarrassment and the undermining of their position on the war in Vietnam, that they created the White House Plumbers Group to stem the leaks. And their illegal activities is what led to the Watergate scandal and the fall of a president. The analogy might fall apart a little bit at this point, 50 years and more on, because it seems like the ability to shame a president for their illegal activities or to get their congressional allies to say, no, this has gone far enough, sir. You need to resign, sir. I think we may have lost that gene, but you can see how this is the pathway that leads to the end of presidencies. Fear of reporting of the First Amendment, of how the media is going to treat the way you prosecute a war, has led to the fall of a presidency before, and it's not impossible that it could again.
That's the through line of everything that we've talked about here, is that what makes our country great and the reason it works is really primarily the First Amendment. Americans are the boss. The government is accountable to the people. When one side puts their thumb on the scale, and that side is the federal government, and they start suppressing information, now it's not a government that's accountable to the people. It's a government that does whatever the hell it wants to do. And it is dangerous because you do get the Pentagon Papers if you don't have that. You do get the fact that we hide and we deceive, and our government does things that it shouldn't do. And that is un-American.
And let's close out on this. It's such a sign of fear and ignorance, because it is true that 64% of Americans still get their news, part of their news, from television, which the FCC does regulate. 86% get their news from digital sources, which the FCC does not regulate. If you're listening to the sound of my voice or looking at the wonderful sight of our faces right now, you are on a platform that the FCC does not regulate. And that means we can say whatever the hell we want, and Brendan Carr can't do a damn thing about it. That whiny little mafioso baby, Brendan Carr, can't do anything about speech he doesn't like. And speaking of disingenuous acts, let's get to this week's That's Bullshit.
Bullshit. Bullshit. Bullshit.
Bullshit.
A bullshit?
I'm about to show you one of the craziest examples of political flip-flopping hypocrisy anyone's ever seen.
It is not the intelligence community's responsibility.
You're evading a question.
But that's not the whole story. There's a deeper and much more twisted issue going on here, and I'll get to that in a minute. The flip-flop is crystal clear. Here's Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard twisting herself in knots in her congressional testimony this week, trying to justify President Donald Trump's war with Iran.
The assessment of the intelligence community is that Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated by last summer's airstrikes.
Yes,
There has been no effort since then to try to rebuild their enrichment capability.
that's right.
She agrees that Iran has no nuclear threat and hasn't tried to rebuild one, but when asked if they now pose an imminent threat to the U.S., which is what President Trump claimed in launching the war,
Was it the assessment of the intelligence community that there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime, yes or no?
Senator, the only person who can determine what is and is not an imminent threat is the president.
False.
and
This is the
nation.
worldwide threats hearing where you present to Congress national intelligence, timely, objective, and independent of political considerations.
just so we're clear. The message is, it's okay to go to war if you think a regime poses a threat. Only the president gets to make that call, not Congress. And it's totally fine if Trump decides to go to war with Iran specifically. But a few years ago, when she was running for president, regime change wars were not such a good idea.
President Trump campaigned against regime change wars when he ran for president. But now he bows to the wishes of the neocons who surround him, clamoring for regime change wars that he claimed to oppose.
And she thought Congress had a slightly bigger role to play.
The Constitution has placed the responsibility to declare war in the United States Congress. Congress needs to stop abdicating its responsibility.
But at least she probably wasn't specifically talking about Iran.
President Trump, your Iran strategy has been ill-advised and very short-sighted. You need to change course now.
How does a war with Iran serve the best interests of the American people in the United States? A war that would undermine our national security. It would carry a heavy human cost, and it would cost us taxpayers trillions of dollars.
But like I said, it's a humiliating moment for Gabbard, completely erasing the core of everything she supposedly stood for, what she based her whole presidential campaign on. But to be fair, it's not entirely new for the people working for an administration to back a president's war plans, even if it means reversing themselves or blowing up their credibility.
The facts and Iraq's behavior show that Saddam Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction. Leaving Saddam Hussein in possession of weapons of mass destruction for a few more months or years is not an option.
The deeper and more disturbing issue going on here is that this is part of a pattern.
J.D. Vance, former President Trump's VP pick, once called him a moral disaster and, quote, possibly America's Hitler.
I'm definitely not going to vote for Trump because I think that he's projecting very complex problems onto simple villains.
J.D. Vance, Senator Lindsey Graham, who warned that Republicans would deserve to lose if they nominated Trump because he was, quote, a jackass. Current Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who once called Trump a con artist. There's a long list of senior Republicans and Trump administration members who have sold their birthright for a mess of Trumpage. But even that kind of surrender, that kind of abasement, even that isn't the whole story of what's going on here. Because for years, Trump has made his opposition to war, the claims that he's ended 6 or 7 or 8 of them, the recent creation of his Board of Peace, all of that has been a central talking point of his supposed America First agenda. It was such a successful political bit that his followers bought into it. Before the war started, even a majority of MAGA Republicans said that the U.S. should be cautious about using military force abroad, especially when it comes to regime change wars. But the moment Trump launched this war with Iran, MAGA voters got right in line, with nearly 90% saying they were on board. And that's because in polls, MAGA voters give Trump a 100% approval rating, the kind of result you only see in authoritarian countries with dictatorial cult leaders. And that's really the deeper issue here. Tulsi Gabbard is just the latest senior administration leader to do this Trump walk of shame, and it's part of an overall pattern where all of MAGA world acts like Prince Hakeem's arranged bride in Coming to America.
What do you like to do?
Whatever you like.
What kind of music do you like?
Whatever kind of music you like.
Bark like a dog.
This series is called That's Bullshit. A political flip-flop doesn't seem like a prime example. But like I said at the top, this isn't really a flip-flop story. It's really about an entire presidency and movement built on nonsense, lies, and an attempt to deceive. And that is the essence of bullshit. All right. And with that, it's time for everyone's favorite ender to the show, a dose of hope.
The White House just registered aliens.gov. Yes. No, that's real. That actually happened. Now I have some questions. What is this? Men in Black is a secret office under DC we've just been pretending doesn't exist? Honestly, it would explain a lot of people in the government. Are we doing Independence Day now? Is there a secret bunker somewhere with Windows 95 computer and Jeff Goldblum just waiting to hack the mothership? It's the X-Files. Because if Mulder walks out of a Senate hearing next week, I'm going to have a lot more questions. Look, we don't have a budget. We don't have a plan for inflation. But somewhere in the federal government, someone said, you know what we need? Lock down aliens.gov. Think about how that meeting went. Okay, team. I know the economy's a mess. Global tensions rising. But if aliens show up, are we ready? Do we have a website? Because here's the crazy part. 10 years ago, if you said the government was tracking UFOs, you were nuts. Now, Obama gets asked about aliens and goes, yeah, they're real, just not here. Hillary Clinton sitting in a deposition about Jeffrey Epstein getting UFO questions. And apparently we've got the domain name ready to go. What's the rollout here? Do we get a press conference? Good evening. We'd like to welcome our new alien overlords. Please visit aliens.gov for FAQs. Maybe the aliens are coming. Maybe there's invasion. I don't know. But what I do know is this. There is a guy somewhere in Washington whose entire job is, if aliens show up, launch the website. And honestly, that might be the best job in government right now.
I'm looking forward, if the aliens show up, for the Trump administration to write the handbook to serve man. For my dose of hope, for all the talk about how divided we are, this week, tens of millions of Americans all did the exact same thing. We filled out a bracket. This was, of course, around one of the last truly shared American experiences, March Madness. And what's really great about it is that unlike other shared cultural experiences like big streaming shows or sports events like the Super Bowl, we don't just watch, we play along. We're all in it. 70 million Americans fill out brackets each year, mostly in office pools or friend groups, or like my family in family competitions, which in my case involves more than 40 of my in-laws because I married into a giant family, and getting into a sports argument with your in-laws, let alone occasionally winning it, is dangerous a proposition as getting into a political argument, except in this case, we all have fun. In fact, this is one of the few places left in American life where competition is actually fun. Except for the moment in your office pool where the least informed person who never watches basketball and doesn't know a panini from a full court press and probably picked based on which team's mascot would win in a fight wins the pool. Seriously, my son asked me this week if a blue devil would defeat a tornado. I mean, yes, if it's Aladdin. I've coached basketball for years, and this little twerp is going to beat me. So, yes, this is awesome. And yes, I have to acknowledge that sports betting has become a real issue. It's still one of the few places where it's mostly harmless and low stakes and genuinely fun. And what's extra great is that the shared American experience is only getting bigger, because last year's women's NCAA championship outdrew viewership for the men's championship. It got 18.7 million viewers. It has had growth of 60 to 90% year over year in viewership. And here's the funny thing. We spend so much time worrying about uncertainty and chaos in the real world. This is the one place where we actually embrace it. There is a 1 in 9.2 quintillion chance of a perfect bracket. Major upsets are a guarantee every year. And the point is, we love it. It's chaotic, it's unpredictable, and somehow it still works. Kind of like the country that I'm pretty darn fond of. March Madness is one of the last places where we can all take part in something together and argue about it and compete with each other and actually have fun doing it. Kind of like here on Political Rehab. And on that note, for Matt, I'm Matt. We'll see you next time.